Okay, I guess I will get things started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Dima Yash, and I am the head of communications for this year's German American Conference. And I am delighted to welcome you all to our event today with Ingmar Nolting and Jordan Jones. Our theme this year is Neustart, or overhaul in English, and as the world grapples with doing things differently this year, we decided to forego our traditional 3-day conference for a virtual event series throughout the fall, and we have explored the Neustart theme across a wide variety of topics. We are really humbled by the support and encouragement that we've received from all of you, and we're so glad to be able to bring you the event series in what has been a challenging year for everyone. Our event series would not be possible without the generous support of Wunderbar Together, Germany and the US, and the work of our exceptional team behind the scenes in event planning, communications, and digital logistics. Before we begin, I want to let you all know that there will be a Q&A towards the end of the event, so please submit your questions via the chat or use the raise hand function to ask your questions. In everything that you share with us, please adhere to our code of conduct. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague Cosima to kick off the event.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening again. My name is Cosima Matner, and I am delighted to welcome you all to our event today called Lens Through COVID, Pandemic and Pictures. As COVID-19 continues to challenge political and economic systems, this event was intended as a space to take a minute, step back, and watch to sharpen our vision on how pandemic reboots societies and cultures. In the gallery walk just now, we have already started to do so with Ingmar Nolting's photography. With NYC-based curator and artist Jordan Jones, we're now hoping to explore this photographic perspective on the aesthetics of COVID-19 in Germany with a transatlantic twist. Hence, I am very excited to welcome both speakers. The photographer Ingmar Nolting lives and works as a freelance photographer in Leipzig in Germany. He holds a bachelor's degree in photography from the University of Applied Sciences and Arts, Dortmund. His work focuses on long-term photo essays that deal with issues of social, geographical, and geopolitical isolation. He is a founding member of the Docs Collective for Humanist Photography, and his work has been published in Time, Zeit, and the Geo magazine, amongst others, and he has been awarded with a Getty Images Grand World Report Award and a VG Bildkunst Scholarship. Our moderator, Jordan Jones, is an artist and curator living in, and working in New York. She is currently a joint curational fellow at the Studio Museum in Harlem and at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, working with the Department of Drawings and Prints at MoMA. She received her BA from Williams College as one of the first graduates of the Interdisciplinary Art and Theory program, and has also participated in the Studio Museum's education practicum. Her curational practice is centered around care, refusal, and futurity. Before we begin, I would like to remind you again that you will get the chance to pose questions at the end of the discussion by raising your hand or posting in the chat. And with this, I would like to hand over to Ingmar, who will give a short presentation of his images himself.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks again for this nice introduction, Cosima, and thank you for the invitation and the possibility to talk about my project, Measure and Middle, A Journey Through Germany During the COVID-19 Pandemic. It's a photo essay that I worked on in March, April, and May this year during the first COVID lockdown in Germany. So everything started in the end of February. We had like 50 COVID cases in Germany, and I didn't really think that this virus could be a serious problem for Europe or especially Germany. I thought we have a very good healthcare system here. Our economy is quite stable. And I think that most of the people at that time thought the same. But as things developed, the virus doesn't really care about what I think. It just starts spreading wherever there's the possibility. And so it started to spread very fast in Germany too. So 3 weeks after, beginning from the 16th of March, Germany started to close non-essential shops. Germany started to close the restaurants, and it also closed the borders to our neighboring countries like Switzerland or France. And also gatherings of more than 3 people were banned. And all this was announced on March 18 when Angela Merkel gave a talk on TV where she said, "This is serious. Since the Second World War, no challenge to our nation has demanded such a degree of common and united action." So this was a really historic speech, and I think it was also the first time that she held a speech like this on TV. And I thought, okay, this speech is very historic, and that everything that will come after this speech will be different from the life I knew before. So the everyday life is going to change, and this pandemic will not be over in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I decided that I wanted to photograph what was happening in Germany. And I thought about which photos would be made in this time. I thought that there are going to be photo reportages, like really dramatic photo reportages from the front lines, from the hospitals, but also projects about the risk group or photos of empty streets, etc. But I wanted my project to focus on the society, and I wanted to see and to document how the situation was changing, and also how the society changes. And in the end, I wanted to put all this together to maybe have like an image or a photo essay that talks about the state of a German society in this kind of global crisis that we were living in. I was really curious how things will develop, and I wanted to follow the whole COVID situation. And I wanted my photograph to carry this surreal feeling that I had when I started the project. I had the feeling, because everything developed so fast and the COVID cases were increasing so fast, I had the feeling that I woke up, like after dreaming, I woke up, and the world I woke up in is not the same anymore than the one that I fell asleep in. And I wanted my photographs to carry this kind of feeling. So the idea was to do something like a visual journey through Germany. And the idea was to collect all the small stories that were playing out everywhere in Germany at the same time. So I needed a car to get myself from A to B, and I don't have a car, but my parents have one, and they were working from home. They were in home office. So I asked them if I can have their car, and I started working a couple days after this historic speech of Angela Merkel. And what followed was a 9,000 kilometer journey through Germany. So this was the general information about my project, and now I'm going to show you a couple of photographs and maybe share some thoughts about them. What you can see here are hospitals' beds in the Hanover Fair, in the exhibition halls of the Hanover Fair, where they wanted to build a makeshift hospital, and they planned to use this makeshift hospital when other all of the other hospital beds are in use. And for me, this picture shows like the tragedy that is about to happen but has not happened yet. At that point, we already knew the pictures from the intensive care units from north of Italy, from Bergamo. So everyone was afraid. This is one of the first portraits I took in the end of March. It shows a doctor at a PCR COVID test center in southern Germany, and I had the chance to take this portrait of him just before the beginning of his shift. And I had the feeling that this portrait might also talk about or show some of the uncertainty that everyone was facing at the beginning of this pandemic, and also maybe some of the anxiety. This photograph shows an improvised stage at the Eastern service in the drive-in cinema in Düsseldorf, which is in the western part of Germany. And for me, this was really interesting to see how people find ways within this COVID situation to do the things they really need to live and to survive. And so they found ways to celebrate Easter together. And this year it looked like this, but somehow they found the way doing the things they love. This is a portrait of Mohammed and Saleh. Both of them fled from Syria last year and came to Germany. And I shot this portrait at a refugee center in Suhl in Thüringen. And this whole refugee center was under quarantine because they had one person tested positive for COVID-19. And so there was the fence between both of them and me. And I think that this crisis really highlighted social issues that existed before the pandemic, but were not really present in the everyday media narrative. And so this crisis also shows what is not going good in our societies, because the living conditions for refugees were always difficult, and so they became COVID hotspots. Same goes for the meat industry. We had a really big COVID hotspot there in summer. It's a scene at the German Bundestag during a speech of Angela Merkel. For me, this pandemic or the whole crisis is not only a crisis of the health system or of the economy, it's also a personal crisis for everyone living in these days. And so I decided to also have my family as a part of the project. So some of the people I photographed are members of my family. This photograph shows my aunt during a dental treatment. And the dentist bought this kind of special protective helmets to keep herself and her patients safe. Members of the Posaunenchor Essing, a church brass band, and the photo is shot in the village that I grew up in. And the brass band could not meet due to the pandemic, so they decided to play everywhere in the village. Every Sunday at 10:30 in the morning, they played the same chorals. So somehow they felt connected, even though they were isolated. That's the border between Austria and Germany in Sigmarszell, and a picture like this would have never been, possible or something to think about before the pandemic, especially for my generation, because like in Europe there are no borders and we can just move freely from country to country. So this is a situation that I myself, I'm 25, I could have never imagined before the pandemic. And it also for me shows how fast things can change, things that I really believed in, like the freedom of moving between countries in Europe. A scene at a funeral that took place without any mourners because of the high risk of infections at funerals. And there was this, the management decided to not allow the mourners. So because of the people, there are a lot of people from the risk group meeting there. And so I think for 2 months, they banned people from the whole thing. And it was a really emotional situation for me because I was the only one present. For me, sometimes it's not only the obvious things that happen that I photograph. Sometimes it's like some scenes I see at the side of the stage. Like this was a scene at the press conference. Actually, it was next to a press conference, and it shows the Stefan Weil. This guy is Stefan Weil. He's the minister president of Lower Saxony. And that's the last picture I want to show before we're starting our conversation. It shows Cameron Carpenter, an organist, during a rehearsal for an Easter live stream concert in Berlin. For me, this was a really special moment because I realized during this rehearsal and the concert, which happened the day after on Easter Sunday, that my position is a really privileged one because everyone is staying home, and I was missing going to concerts, and I was missing meeting people like in this social event, and I had the chance to go there and to see it, and everyone else just saw it online. So after the lockdown, I did not stop documenting, and the project is still ongoing. And I'm right now documenting and photographing the second wave in Germany. And this time Germany has been hit quite hard, much harder than it has been in March and April and May this year. Because at that time the virus spread was really was brought under control really, really fast, and the situation has never been in Germany like it was in Italy or in America. So I don't know how long this pandemic will last or how long it will affect our society. And so in the end, the aim of the project is a large visual narrative that might later tell about this time and about the German society in this global crisis.
Thank you, Ingmar. That was wonderful. I think I really appreciated. I think this is like my first time hearing you like live talk about these images, and I just really appreciate that so much. To sort of hear your the chronicling of this moment for you. And I guess I just want to begin by saying, how are you? I feel like we talked a little bit before this, but I didn't how are you doing? Because I feel like it's a challenging time, and I think it's important that we all just like have moments to check in, like these real human moments. So how are you doing?
I'm quite good. Right now I'm in Allgäu, at the border to Austria, taking some days off because I've been working and photographing a lot during the last months and last weeks. And it's going to be a hard time this winter, I think. So I'm right now taking a few days off and stepping back from my work and trying to focus again afterwards. So I'm pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I think, yeah, I'm okay. I think it's hard to know how you are. I feel like every day there sort of is a new challenge or a new unfolding. I think, I think these past 2 months, it hasn't just been one crisis, right? It's been many crises. We don't get to choose to sort of deal with things one at a time. And I think, yeah, I think I'm doing okay today. I think that's good. I think, and thinking about your images, it's been really great to sort of reflect on these past 2 months to actually see how I actually have felt over time. Because you're sort of living through it, it is sort of challenging to know where you are. And I guess that's like I wanted to begin to talk about, because I think when I first looked at your images, I think I was so struck by how they were called sort of images I had seen earlier, like coming out of Italy, and how in many ways, like we experienced the pandemic first through images, right, of other places, and then it sort of came to where we were, and then we were confronted with it. And in some ways, like those images were like a predictor or like a way of seeing into our future. And now that we know the pandemic is something that sort of is here to stay, your images also sort of are a predictor of a future we haven't experienced yet, right? And so I think I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you sort of experience like time in your images and like how you feel they're placed. And also wondering like how you think, or like, I mean, since the project is continuing, how are you seeing sort of like things you captured in like March and April and May carry through?
I think it was really important for Germany to have these images from Italy, because I think they were published just short after the lockdown in Germany was announced. And so everyone was really afraid that the situation will come to this point in Germany too. So I felt that Germany it felt really united, like everyone had the challenge, like to stay home and to avoid a scenario that we have been seeing through the images and through the media from the north of Italy. So I think that these images were really important for Germany, and that's why Germany came through this first wave of infections quite good. So, and we didn't wear masks at that time. It started short after the lockdown, or when we tried to get back to like a new normal after the lockdown. So, and you can also see it in the images. Not a lot of people are wearing masks. As I'm continuing this project right now, like everyone wears masks all the time, everywhere you go, and it's if you have the photos as a timeline, you can really see those waves, because I've been documenting also the life that we had this summer. We had really crowded beaches at the Baltic Sea, and actually it's one of the places that I've been back to, because I was there during the lockdown too, and it was completely empty because there was a ban of movement in that area. And now this summer it was really crowded, and now we're just going back. But the situation this winter is different from the situation in March, I think, because like I don't know how it is in America, but what I feel in Germany is that there's kind of a winter COVID depression, like a collective one, that everyone is really tired of the virus and the restrictions, and Christmas is coming and the days are getting darker and shorter, and that's really, really challenging. And that's something I realize when I'm taking photos right now.
That's so, yeah, I think so critical. Like, I think, yeah, the tiredness, I think, is definitely real. I think something I've been thinking a lot about, what does it mean to sort of like experience a crisis that is slow, and to sort of have to live like in a durational crisis. I think when we think about like sort of like crisis moments in history, we think about like, oh, there's an event, it happens, and it's sort of like you can go to that event and like there's a specific location, a specific time where you see that's where the crisis happened. But I think the challenge with this pandemic is that it is so diffuse, and it is so so prolonged. And I think it's something like we're not prepared for, like culturally, right? I think we focus on events, and rather than like sort of these slow unfolding narratives, which I think that's why projects like yours are so critical, right? Because I think it is about that sort of duration. Something you also, I think, brought up for me in what you're just saying is thinking about, it's a project about time passing, but also, and like strict restrictions on how we're experiencing our time, but also like a restriction in movement. And I know like the image of the border is something that comes up. You have the border between France and Germany, the border between Switzerland and Germany, the border between Austria and Germany, and other kinds of borders, like the fence you see around the refugee center is in your images. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and how just sort of like I think also about the image of your grandmother as just sort of in the doorway, and how that doorway itself is also another kind of sort of border. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of how you think about that kind of visual of the border in your images.
Like the pandemic really put up these borders between people. It put up the borders between myself and my own grandmother, because we cannot meet like face to face. We always have to I think during the lockdown we maintained the distance of 4 to 6 meters all the time when we were meeting, and only outside. And this really changes the way we interact. And meeting on Zoom is cool and it's so much fun, but it cannot replace like real physical contact. And this is why I think the first photograph I showed at the border between Switzerland and Germany is really important, because it shows that even if there are borders, we as human beings really need physical contact between each other. And that when I shot this photo, it was a time when there were actually 2 borders. They put up 2 fences with a couple of feet in between those fences, just to avoid this physical contact. And those young couples that I photographed, they found one spot where there was only one fence. And that's what I also try to do with my images, to not only show, okay, there's a border and people are separated, but also to speak about something else that everyone can relate to, like the feeling when you're young and you have your first girlfriend, and also like those helmets that are just in the left corner of the image. It carries like the feeling of being young, but yes, we're like in the middle of a pandemic. So yeah, it's different.
Yeah, I wonder, thinking about distance, like yourself as a photographer has that, I feel like there is a sense of like distance between yourself and the subjects in the images themselves. I think I like feel like that there's a separation between where the camera is and where the figures are. And I wonder if that is a product of the pandemic, or like a product of sort of the moment, or like something that reflects a normal way of your working. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like how do you feel that distance, that space as well, like as a photographer particularly?
Yeah, my visual language is distanced, was always distanced. I like to go a few steps back and show the whole scenario or the whole scene, more than going into the details and showing only the hands between the borders and the fans. I just want to show the whole situation. I've been working like this, like for all the other projects that I did, but in this case, yeah, it really fitted. It fits the situation, and maybe that's why you can also feel the distance in those pictures, because there's also the physical distance.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm particularly struck by like the image like on the hillside with the two brass players. I think like I feel so far away, and like I feel like them playing to their like fellow bandmates who are also so far away, and that feels particularly just like very poignant to me. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's really beautiful and sad at the same time. But I think also like there's a strangeness to it too, right? I think you talked a little bit about the idea of like, you know, going to bed one night and waking up in sort of a new and strange place. And like the idea of the uncanny or the surreal is also something that I really picked up on the images, I think, because there's a strangeness to like things we cannot have imagined, a lot of the things that have taken place. Like there's that one image of an essential worker who was in a clinic that it was in a former steakhouse and bowling alley, and like that is not like something you would ever imagine, like those spaces becoming medical centers. And I think yeah, there's just sort of like a strangeness, and I think your images also sort of have a dreaminess to them in the palette. I think like there is sort of a muted sort of like soft quality, and I'm wondering if you could just like expand a little bit more on like how, like, I think it is probably surreal to be in those spaces taking those photos. If I'm, yeah, tell me about it.
For me, it really felt surreal because like I talk to my friends every day and to my family just to stay connected, and I was the only one traveling. Of course, I was the only one traveling. Everyone else stayed at home or was working from home. So for me, it was kind of a really special situation, and I really I didn't felt isolated myself, but somehow, how to describe it? I felt like I cannot really get close to the things that are happening there, because everything was so changing so fast, and I was following the news every day, and not only the news like Zeit or the big German newspaper, also the local news from different parts of Germany, because I wanted to stay updated on all those small local stories that were going on. And so this feeling to be like really working and traveling a lot and driving 600 kilometers per day from southern Germany to Berlin just felt not real, and not like, it doesn't really fit the situation where everything was just shut off and muted, you know. So for me, it was very special time. And it's totally different right now, because yeah, we get used to this situation somehow. And of course, I can't get out of my head when I'm out taking photos, like the mood I'm in, it's in the photos too. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that. I think there is something so personal about this project too. I think like all of our experiences of the pandemic are very personal. I think there's no way that like it cannot be. But there is this interesting tension, right? Because it is so personal, everyone's individual experience of the pandemic, but then it also is something that is so national and so global. And your images do like an amazing job of tracing that, right? You go from sort of like your cousin's ballet classes at home to the Bundestag. And I think, I would love to hear more about your sort of decision to like try and capture such a wide scope.
why you took this decision?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not the person that like tries to do the small stories and really detailed stories about like maybe one family, or my projects have always been like visual journeys through the topics or issues I researched before. I did a project about a high rise in Göttingen, and the project is like a journey through this whole building of 70 stories, and it sheds light on different people, and I'm more interested in those big big questions, and working on this project, like the chance to fail is pretty high, because I told my idea to some editors and to some friends, and they said, okay, it's crazy to do this. Maybe you go into one hospital, or maybe you focus on the risk group, or like to get a more clear focus on something. But I said, no, I'm just interested in everything and how everything is changing. And I don't want to put my focus on this particular thing like for a longer time. And I thought, that someone needs to do the bigger, wider scale, because I think in the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was scared. I got a couple of phone calls of colleagues end of April, in beginning of May, and they started, they said, okay, we heard that you're doing a photo project on the pandemic in Germany. We wanted to start our project too. But I've been working for 2 months already, because everyone was like in kind of a shock. It was a shock situation, and could not decide. And I started very at the beginning of the pandemic, so I thought it's good to have the bigger scale. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's incredibly challenging, and I wonder, like, if you could talk a little bit about how you sort of like prepared to set out on this like 9,000 kilometer journey. I think, like, how do you take care of yourself sort of like physically and also emotionally as like you started this project and also as you continue it? Because I think, right, like it is interesting how, all right, like people had, like, there was a moment of like, it seems like a daunting task to many people, including myself. And so I wonder how you set out to do that, and like also how you continue to do it, because I think, right, again, that sort of like durational strain is real, and I think I want to know how you take care during these hard times.
When I started the project, I was really anxious too, because it was a time when we didn't know a lot about the virus and how it's how people infect each other. And there was just, they said, please try to keep the distance of 1.5 meters, but actually these 1.5 meters are pretty random. So there were no scientific research on this. So I called a couple of healthcare workers and doctors and asked them if they have some advice for me, and asked them what they think about the project. And no one would ever say, oh, that's an awesome idea, go travel, in times where everyone should stay at home. But they said, okay, if you think it's relevant and you really want to do it, it's your job to photograph, do it. But wear FFP2 masks whenever inside, reduce the time of contacts, shoot outside, keep the distance, always travel with your own car, sleep. And I slept in holiday homes that were empty, and I slept in the house of friends or family members, but always where I could separate myself, so I was not in contact with them. And that's how I try to make my work safe for myself and for other people. Yeah.
Okay, thank you both. We have to start the Q&A session, so I would like to call Dima first for posing a question.
Thank you, Cosima, and thank you so much, Jordan and Ingmar. Ingmar, thank you for sharing your work. I found it to be extremely touching, and you managed to capture a lot of nuance in the different ways that the different groups of society experience the pandemic. And in your images, I saw a lot of sadness and loneliness, but I also saw a lot of strength and resilience. And I'm wondering what has been the most surprising thing that you have seen or experienced throughout your travels and as you've documented these experiences?
Interesting questions. I think the most surprising thing was the amount of improvisation, if this is the right word, because Germany is not really a country where there's a lot of improvisation. But in situations like this, where the reality changes from day to day, they just shut down this steakhouse and start building a walk-in clinic there, or they just put up a kind of a sloppy stage for the church for the service on Easter. So this amount of improvisation really was the most, for me, the most surprising one, because it was kind of it was something that I didn't know from Germany, because everything is really strict and has its rules, and everything is done with a lot of care. And yeah.
Maybe Moritz Blum asked a question in the chat that connects to this. The question is, thank you for the great event and the beautiful photos. I have a question for both Ingmar and Jordan. In a pandemic, similar phenomena happen all over the world. Do you feel like there is anything particular German about the photos, things which could not have been captured anywhere else? I think that's a great question connecting to this issue of improvisation. And maybe both of you can respond to that.
For me, I was following like the debates in the newspapers and in the media, and one of the debates was about the asparagus harvest. It's a super German thing, the asparagus, and we need a lot of workers from Eastern Europe to harvest the asparagus. And there was a big debate about if there's going to be enough asparagus for the Germans this year. So this is I think this is a pretty German thing. But I don't know. I think there were really similar things happening all around the world. Like, what do you think about America, Jordan?
Yeah, I think, I was also going to say the asparagus seems particularly German. As a sort of like unintended consequence of the pandemic. I would say I think things that make me feel like I cannot identify them as being particularly like American is that I would say, right, the pandemic here has also been complicated by continuing Black death and police violence. And so I think a lot of the images of the pandemic are also images of protests in the streets. And then also complicated by a presidential election. And I think that imaging also is deeply tied to our pandemic. And I think, it's also, things are so much is still unfolding. I think, in New York, when I think about things that have changed like visually, I think about sort of boarded up buildings, which is also tied to sort of the protests and the art that's sprung up on like the plywood in like Soho. I think about, the undoing of certain aesthetics, right? I think there's monuments that have literally been toppled. I think there's like literally like aesthetics of art that are being destroyed. And I think all of that I think is tied to what my image of like an American pandemic looks like.
Thank you so much. Esteban also had a question.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. Ingmar, I had a question in the same light of Dima on how we can show and photograph the hope. I was thinking about the resilience, and in the case of Colombia, when we photograph a lot of things about the sadness and war, but still on the same hand, we have the hope. Also, how can show the hope in the photographs.
That's a good question too. The hope in the I think that my images, not all of them are sad. For me, some of them, it depends on the angle that you look at them, because I think some of them are also a bit funny. Because maybe the image from the fairground with the pilots, how do you call them? Those markings, somehow there are also like small funny moments, but the question was how we can also show hope. For me, there was hope in the summer. Because it showed us how there is a life which is where there is COVID, but we can somehow live with it, and we can arrange our everyday lives with it. We can like do our holidays in our countries, but yeah, so there was some hope for me. But right now, for me, I have difficulties to photograph the hope right now, because we're just entering the second wave and the winter. Yeah.
Thank you. And then we have Irv Plotkin with a question.
Yes, thank you. It was a wonderful documentation of this, especially across time. I basically have two comments. When I was in the galleries, I was very taken by the photograph of the woman, the older woman in her house, and I was thinking, I don't know whether you would give titles to your photographs, but somehow what hit me was a line from Heine, "Dass ich so traurig bin." Might be a good title for that. And then you said how masks were coming on, but you had a picture in the Bundestag, I think. It looked like there were more Republicans than Democrats, because you could see only one man wearing a mask and all the others didn't have the mask. I wonder if that's a commentary or
I think it was FDP, members of FDP, which is the Liberal Party. No, there was in Germany, there was a shortage on masks. So we didn't know if we have enough masks for healthcare workers. So in the beginning, everyone said you don't need to wear a mask, because they want to keep the masks for the hospitals. And so the photo in the Bundestag, I think it was in April some day. It was just how the situation was. People started wearing masks, and but it was not like it was not a rule to wear masks inside rooms or something. Yeah.
Thank you. Congratulations on your good work.
Okay, I also have a question. I was wondering how the specific aesthetics of the images, with the structures, the patterns, the colors. I think there is a lot of very interesting, color patterns in the images, and which have, to me, a futurist or like a certain a focus on the technology also that is brought about by the crisis and invades all our lives. And I was wondering how you, Jordan, in seeing those images, saw something also transnational, if that's something that you experience as an American in New York City as well, or if you still see the stereotypical German order in those images and being so clean in a certain way?
That's an interesting question. Thank you for it. I think it's interesting because I think some of the images, right, I think about the idea of like preparedness and like organization and it's like tying hand in hand. And so I think about like the idea of this image of like a sort of like exhibition hall filled with these empty beds and sort of like their crisis has not filled them yet. And so I think like there is a kind of like the approach to a pandemic that like involves that kind of preparation, I think is like a very particular kind of experience. Whereas I think like in New York, right, there was like tents popping up like within a day, like in Central Park and being full immediately. And I think, you know, I think that speaks to like a different level of crisis. I think there is something, I think like, yeah, I think definitely like futurist. I think that's like important to talk about because I think like time, I think these images again is like really interesting to look at. And I think, you know, there's a way in which, like I was saying, I think there's a way in which these images like will predict our future everywhere, not just in Germany. And so I think I would hope that like images like this of these empty beds is actually what the future looks like, right? I think sort of being prepared sort of beyond like, you know, beyond the actual impact of a crisis. And so I think that's something that I see in these images. I think it's also interesting to think about. Yeah, I think like yeah, I think some of the palettes like it feels like it feels like I also hope that like this also becomes some sort of like a fiction. Like there's a way in which like we can imagine like a fiction that sort of tells a story of a pandemic in the future that like is handled in a proper way. And that sort of begins sort of with this kind of like preparation as well. Like I think like the way we tell stories about pandemics needs to shift. And so I think rather than it being like a crisis and like everyone, like it's something we live through and something we are living through. And so I think that's also something that's important.
Thank you. Then we have a question by Stan.
Hi both. Thank you for the great series and the discussion. I have a question now that we're seeing the pandemic move on as well into the second wave. I'm curious how perhaps your lens or your focus is going to change, and if you're going to continue your series with a second wave, and perhaps in a more positive note, you know, with the hope of a vaccine, are you planning anything around that or around the progression or hopefully the end of the pandemic?
In the last weeks, I really had the feeling that my work or my photos are speaking too generally about the things that are going on, and I'm really missing the personal aspect to it, because, you know, I've been a lot to demonstrations. There was like in the beginning, like November, first weekend in November or the second one, there was this big Querdenken demonstration in Leipzig with those people who deny COVID and like this kind of form of protest against the measures that are taken. And I felt like I'm doing the work that is not really my perspective. I cannot really go into those small personal stories that I love to tell. So I'm right now trying to figure things out for the winter. Because like the photos I took in summer and spring, they somehow don't work anymore, because the society, what I just said, is like in this kind of winter depression, and yeah, those small moments just don't really happen.
Yeah, how do you, Jordan, experience the continued reaction in the US to the pandemic, and also in comparison to what Ingmar just said, maybe? Is there a shift in people's and how people deal with it in their daily lives?
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging, I think, right? Because it is so personal, and so people feel like it's a personal choice, but it's actually like the pandemic is a community event, right? I think it's important to recognize that, like, you know, we are impacting each other and impacted by each other. And so, right, there's like this politicalization of like what it means to wear a mask. And, you know, certain people feel that impinges on their personal freedoms. And I think, you know, it's hard because I feel like we need to sort of approach this as like, we need to get through this together. Like, I want everyone to wear a mask so I can see all of you in like when the pandemic is over. You know, I want all of us to make it through this. And so, yeah, I think it's challenging. I think, you know, I go into work, go into an office, and, you know, different people behave in different ways on public transportation. And, you know, walk sidewalks in a different way than I would, or than someone next to them would. And so I think it's like a moment of like reckoning as sort of what it means to live in community. And I guess also exposes how community we thought was there is maybe not necessarily there.
Okay, thank you. Do you have closing thoughts? Because we have to wrap up soon. Any final thoughts on the discussion, the project?
I mean, I would just like to say thank you again for the invitation, and thank you, Ingmar, for withstanding all of my many, many questions, and thank you for your beautiful images, and also for doing the hard but necessary work of documenting this moment. I mean, because as you said, I think the story, the collective project will be incredibly, like, it will be incredibly useful to the future.
Thank you too. Thank you so much. Also, thanks for organizing this. It's a lot of work and it's beautiful done. Also with the breakout rooms in the beginning. I think my photos have never been shown like this. So this pandemic forces us to find new ways, and I think it's beautifully done with this.
Yeah, thank you too for joining and providing your perspectives on the images and the pandemic. And I would like to note that Ingmar's images are also available for purchase. The information is in the chat room. If you have any further questions, you can also contact the German American Conference team. And now I would like to hand over to my colleague, Tim, to do a further announcements.
Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I would like to thank our wonderful speakers, Ingmar and Jordan, all the participants joining today, and our team before and behind the scenes, and also all of our partners that support this. I would like to quickly advertise the next event, which is a keynote and discussion with Jens Spahn, the German Federal Minister of Health. It's happening on Monday. Please sign up on our website, germanamericanconference.org. He will be in conversation with Anne McElroy, who is the senior editor at The Economist, and will tell us about COVID as a chance for an updated German foreign policy. Have a great day, good start of the weekend wherever you are, and we hope to see you again very soon.